G'day everybody, it's the Doggy! It's time for another showcase video. This particular video is all about one of Australia's other greatest rock and roll bands to have ever come out of this country. Known occasionally overseas under the name Angel City, they were simply known as just the Angels here in Australia. First formed in 1970 or 1971, I can't remember exactly what year. Originally as the Moonshine Jug and String Band, they briefly became known as the Keystone Angels in 1974, before becoming simply the Angels in 1976. They released a number of albums between 1977 and sometime last decade, but I choose not to count those two most recent albums. But basically, this is all the albums originally released on vinyl between 1977 and 1991, which means that their 1998 album Skin and Bone will not be included. Anyway, the original classic lineup that most fans would know was originally Bernard, or Doc as he was known as, Doc Neeson on lead vocals, John Brewster on rhythm guitar, and his brother Rick Brewster on lead guitar, Chris Bailey on bass guitar, and Graham Buzz Bedstrip on drums. Chris Bailey passed away in early 2013, and Doc Neeson died the following year. Anyway, this is their debut album from 1977, self-titled. Doesn't show up very often online, although I do have many copies, and you'll eventually see in a future part. The basic album, it's got some reasonably good tracks on it. Some of the songs are mentioned here. It's got a different version of what eventually became their biggest well-known hit. Of course, Am I Ever Gonna See Your Face Again, which is perhaps now known for its expletive-filtered chant from the crowd. I'm not going to repeat it here, but my father did teach me a much cleaner version. Something along the lines of "No way, big nose, nick off" when we were younger. But of course, it wasn't until I was much older that I eventually found out the real version. Anyway, the Angels were originally signed to Albert Productions, just like AC/DC, and their debut album was released. As you can see, this has the infamous kangaroo on it, a different design than what was mostly used. This was the very last Albert's album that featured this kangaroo. It was discontinued a little later in the year. It took me a long time to find this original pressing, but now I have it. Definitely has some good songs, like Take Me Home. I was about to say a different song here, Take Me Home, and Shelter From the Rain, which is a bit of a slow ballady rock song, which was originally written by guitar player John Brewster about a girl he had an unrecorded crush on around 1974. Anyway, their first album wasn't exactly a success, but things would change with the release of their second album in 1978, Face to Face. As you can see, this is meant to be a drawing of Doc Neeson, and we've got on the back here as well. This album pretty much launched the phenomenon that became the Angels during this particular time. A large chunk of their hits, like After the Rain, Take a Long Line, Marseille, I Had the One. Pretty much the entire album is pretty much well known to fans of the band. Inside here, the gatefold cover, we've got a picture of the band. Picture from left to right, Rick Brewster's here. Perhaps known for just simply standing still like a statue during performances. We've got Buzz Bedstrip here on the drums, John Brewster there, Chris Bailey there on bass, and Doc Neeson, who was probably the most charismatic frontman to ever come out of Belfast, Ireland, but moved to Australia at a young age. The rest of the band were mainly Australians, but we'll get to more on that in a moment. Again, this is the album itself. Blue label, but of course it might look black in this particular lighting. Sorry about that. I do have another black label that's similar to this, but I think it's the no water version. And of course side 2. My opinion, it's their best album. Unfortunately, it seems to have completely disappeared off the radar. Did get a reissue a few years back, but then just sort of disappeared again. Anyway, their equally successful follow-up came the following year in 1979. No Exit. Again, the lineup of the band was the same at the time. And Doc is now hidden behind the shadow here. That's his eyes there. The back cover is fairly plain looking. Inside the gatefold cover, so this is another gatefold. We've got the lyrics to all the songs here. Probably, again, some of their most infamous songs like Shadow Boxer, which was a huge hit. Mr. Damage, which, again, was a regular in their live set during this time. Can't Shake It. Another killer song that really kicks some serious rear end on stage. After Dark is another classic, and the title track as well. And over here, another picture of the late, great Doc Neeson. Definitely, next to Bon Scott, is one of the finest frontmen in rock and roll history. This particular album, the band went with a unique label design. Hang on, it's stuck. I need to open it. There we go. Fairly unique label design. I can just straighten it up here. And pretty much the same on the back, but with the title reversed. Anyway, the band only recorded just 3 albums for Albert's before management decided to try and get them onto a bigger label, and they ended up signing with Epic Records in 1980, but not before their first compilation album was released in 1980, The Angel's Greatest, which essentially combines a good chunk of the material from the first 3 albums plus a non-album song that was recorded live. And the track listing on the back here. Yeah, Who Rings the Bell was originally on the flip side of the After the Rain Tour EP in the latter half of 1978. Again, they picked a few songs from the first 3 albums. Definitely an interesting choice for their first compilation album. But I'm guessing Albert were determined to try and cash in on the success before they ended up leaving the label. And once again, this is one of the last of the original Blue labels. To this day, even John Brewster has gone on to say that he wishes that the band never left Albert's, because apparently they had plans to do for them what they had done with AC/DC, and perhaps they would have become just as successful as AC/DC. But unfortunately, it didn't happen, but they still managed to keep popular here in Australia. And so we enter 1980. Officially titled Dark Room, this is a fairly bland looking front cover featuring the eyes of Doc Neeson once again. This album contains probably their best known song of that particular era. And it's just a plain blank rear cover, but again we've got the gatefold. We've got the lyrics to songs, you know, No Secrets was the band's biggest hit from that album. And Poor Baby and Face the Day were also singles off this album as well. Definitely a good album for its time. And this was also the last album to feature Buzz Bidstrup as the band's drummer. He would leave the band after they supported AC/DC on their Back in Black tour in 1981. And side 2 here. Again, some great songs. Alexander is a classic, that one. Devil's Gate's a nice classic song, but things would start to change. In 1981, the band brought in New Zealander Brent Eccles as their drummer and released their 5th studio album, second on the Epic label, Night Attack. This was actually the very first LP I ever bought 10 years ago this month for about $10 in a store in Brisbane City called Record Exchange. It's still open today, but I just don't go to it anymore. Just haven't been really able to go there due to COVID and stuff. Again, some of the songs in this album are pretty impressive. You've got Long Night, which is another killer song, that one. You've got City Out of Control in the title track, and Talk About You is probably the fastest song they ever did as well. Inside cover, we've got the lyrics to both sides of each song. Again, it's impossible to read here. And I think this is a picture from the aftermath of the December 31st, 1979 concert at the Sydney Opera House. Like, yeah, okay, whatever. Not the best way to enter the 1980s. Doc Neeson getting hit with a flying projectile during their performance on stage. And this album doesn't seem to show up very often now, but I think it was about $10. Again, 10 years ago, when I started my LP collection, this was the very first one I ever bought. Anyway, the band had done a couple of American tours, including one where they supported a reunited Kinks, where their idiotic frontman Ray Davies grew increasingly jealous of the crowd reactions they were getting. He tried to sabotage them as a support act, but it just didn't work. He ended up kicking the band off the bloody tour. Anyway, they toured the US again in 1982, and Chris Bailey had some issues with his eyes and subsequently had to miss the tour and was replaced by American Jim Hilbun on bass, who would subsequently go on to replace Chris after he was pretty much exiled from the band. And this lineup, featuring Doc, the Brewsters, Brent Eccles on drums, and Jim Hilbun on bass, would record another album in 1983. Watch the Red. This is where the band started to really change their sound. They still had some pretty good tunes in it, but they really started to change what they were doing. The hard edge of the band become a bit softer at this particular point. They had some reasonably good songs, like Eat City was the second single off the album, and Stand Up was written by Hilbun, who had pretty much wrote it on his way to Australia, and the title track is also a good one. But I don't know, the Angels just seem to completely change at this particular point. I think Jim Hilbun's gone on record to describe this album as quirky or something like that. A rare opportunity to hear John Brewster take lead vocals for the song No Sleep in Hell, and Bow Wow's an instrumental. I don't know. It's still a good album, but this is really when things started to change. Anyway, sometime in 1984-85, the band would move to Mushroom Records, but not before Epic put together the second Angels compilation, officially titled The Angels' Greatest Volume 2. This pretty much gathers up the material from the first three, well, not the first three, but the 4th, 5th, and 6th albums that they had put on the Epic label, gathering up tracks from that, as well as the non-album single Into the Heat, which I believe was the last recording that Buzz Bidstrup had played the drums on before Brent Eccles had joined the band. Also, the single edit of Face the Day is used in place of the album version. The single version pretty much chops down the intro, shortens the guitar solo, cuts out the entire bridge section towards the end, and fades out way early. Pretty much 2 minutes of the song pretty much get chopped out as a result. Anyway, this is not a gatefold, so just your basic label. I think this album actually came out before their next studio album, but I prefer to put this one in this order. Mainly it due to it being an Epic label, not a Mushroom label at the time. Definitely a reasonable compilation, to be honest. Not as good as their first compilation album, though. Anyway, the band recorded their next album mostly in America, with the exception of one track. This is probably their least best album of the 80s. 1984's 2 Minute Warning. Definitely a very unusual album. This album seems to lean towards heavy metal sometimes, as well as just terrible production. Again, the album's got some decent songs, like, I think they had 4 singles off the album, including Look the Other Way, Underground, Sticky Little, well, you know, you can see it there for yourself, and Between the Eyes, which was the first single, and also that was issued on the Epic label. I own the single of that, and you will see it probably in another video. But anyway, as you'll see, they also had a song called Razor's Edge, which is completely different from The Razor's Edge by AC/DC. That was recorded a few years later. And eagle-eyed viewers may have noticed that the Angels also had a song called Stand Up, some 2 years before AC/DC did. So anyway, it was still this lineup at this particular point. This would be the last album to feature John Brewster until 1998, but we'll get to that a bit later. I do have the Canadian version of this album as well. Let's have a look at the picture of Doc Ness on the rear of this insert. Anyway, this also comes on a rather unique label. Brent Eccles pretty much took over as the main songwriter, and he contributed to more than half the album's songs. Okay, that's upside down, hang on. Side 2. Definitely not my favourite Angels album. It's definitely a completely different sound, muddied by poor production, and the fact that the majority of the album was recorded in the States was a very different experience to what had been before that. Anyway, at the beginning of 1985, John Brewster found himself out of the band and was subsequently replaced by Bob Spencer, formerly of Skyhooks and later with Rose Tattoo and the Choir Boys. In 1986, the band put out their next album, officially titled Howling. As you can see, this lineup here features Hillbon on the left, Rick Brewster there, Doc in the middle, Brent Eccles, and Spencer on the right here. Again, the band had changed their sound again. It still sounded good, but some of the songs in here are just vastly different from what had come from years gone by. Don't Waste My Time, and also the band did an exceptionally brilliant cover of The Animals' We Gotta Get Out of This Place. That was also a single as well. I also own that, and you will see that in a future video as well. Right, let's open this, pull out the insert, again featuring the lyrics to each song. All Night for You is another good song as well. And on the back here, some liner notes. Eddie Rayner of Split Enz had played the majority of the keyboards on the album, as mentioned here. Alright, now we pull out the LP itself. And side 2 as well. Anyway, that was their last studio album for the 1980s, but in 1988 they also put out their only official live album, officially titled Live Line. Interesting picture of Rick Brewster here. Side cover. Special thanks, that's all that pretty much is. The majority of this was recorded at the Bankstown RSL in 1987, but some recordings were used from 1983 featuring John Brewster. 4 songs are missing from the LP. Small Price on side 1, Underground on side 2, Face the Day on side 3, and Eat City from side 4 are missing on the LP. Small Talk was an unreleased song at that particular point. This LP also did come with a booklet originally, but unfortunately my copy doesn't have it, and I haven't seen another copy to get a booklet for it, but it doesn't matter anyway. I think I might have somewhere, but it doesn't matter. Anyway, some pretty interesting arrangements performed live at this point. But Brent Eccles, for some reason, had a tendency to speed the tempo right up during performances. And it just didn't suit some of the songs, especially, I don't know, Be With You is meant to be a slow love song, whereas here it's way too fast. Love Takes Care is performed acoustically instead of the original version from the Face to Face album, which is played much faster and electrically. And of course, this LP also features the explicit chant of it from Am I Ever Gonna See Your Face Again? I'm sure plenty of Australians who have watched this would probably tell everyone what it is, but I'm not gonna say it. I'm not gonna allow anyone to type it in anyway. Alright. Anyway, Jim Hillbun found himself out of the band by the end of 1989 and was subsequently replaced by another Australian, James Morley, who recorded the next 2 albums. This is 1990's Beyond Salvation. Again, the band had changed their sound quite a bit. Often considered to be their biggest album commercially. I think it was the only #1, I think. I remember hearing the day the band filmed the film clip for Backstreet Pickup was the day they were told that the album had hit #1. Thus, that's why such an enthusiastic performance was featured. The track listing is also out of sequence compared to the cassette and the CD version. Also, this is on double LP for some reason, which definitely is an indication of something that would eventually become almost standard in the future. Another classic picture of the band from this era. We got the lyrics on the back, but some of them are a little on the explicit side, so I'm not going to show them, unfortunately. But let's get the LPs themselves out. 5 singles were issued from this song, but surprisingly, the title track was not one of them. Probably the biggest song of this particular album was Dogs Are Talking, which I believe was probably one of the only, if not the only song that they continued to play live, especially when they did their 2008 reunion tour. I don't know. This would have been interesting to hear the original lineup doing that at the time. No recordings from that tour have surfaced on YouTube, so, you know. Side 3 here. And of course, side 4. Stupid lighting, this stupid bloody iPad. Anyway, the last of their albums released on vinyl in 1991 is Redback Fever. The majority of the album was recorded during the Beyond Salvation sessions, but there were a few extras. I don't know, they seem to take a step back. I mean, Bob Spencer's gone on record to saying that the band had tried to recapture their classic sound, and that's not what he wanted. So he would leave the band in 1992, and John Brewster would rejoin around that time as well. We've got a couple of cover songs like Once Bitten, Twice Shy and Natural Born Woman. Probably the biggest song of this album was probably the opening track, Tear Me Apart. Although the title track is also quite impressive too, and we get another instrumental in the form of No More Words. Being unique for the time, it's also... Okay, we've got the lyrics again. You know, just a bit of an oddity in places, but it's still a great album. And this is when Bob Spencer took to wearing fake dreads or whatever it is, and he played the lead guitar for the majority of this particular period. Don't know why. And some extra liner notes printed down here. Again, too small to read. But the unique thing about this, being one of the last originally pressed Australian LPs, prior to the vinyl revival, about 20 or so years later, is that this is red-coloured. So that definitely makes this unique. Oakley dokley, that is it for part 1. There will be a second part, possibly featuring the 7-inch singles and a number of reissues of albums, especially the Alberts albums that they had, will feature in another video. But, of course, that is the end of this one. Be sure to leave a like, be sure to comment down below. If you're not already, be sure to subscribe to the Be a Good Doggy YouTube channel. And if you've not heard any songs by the Angels, be sure to check them up. All of their albums are on YouTube, including the ones that I didn't show here. But until next time, this is the Doggy saying have a great day, have a great weekend, everybody, and we shall see you again.